Today's subject is the ancient family. You know, if you ask anybody, you say, what was the family structure in the Bible? They will say it was patriarchal. But when you ask how or what is patriarchy, it becomes a little more difficult to explain. So in this episode, what we're going to do is explain the difference of patriarchy and matriarchy. Our definition of patriarchy actually comes from, shall I say, the definition of family comes from two men, Frederick Engels and Johan Bachofen. These two men, and by the way, this is the same Frederick Engels that helped to write or co-authored the manifesto with Karl Marx. Now, the ancient family had a very, very specific structure for a very specific reason. Engels and Bachofen thought that that idea was evolutionary, that it developed. This is more of a Darwinian kind of an idea, okay? But from a creationist standpoint, we have a very different idea, and more specifically, it is Cheikh Diop who actually redefines the concept of patriarchy and matriarchy as it is understood in world civilization, and more specifically Africa. We have to go to Africa in order to explain the biblical family because the Bible is most influenced by African Egypt. So let's begin with what is the structure of the ancient family, especially as it relates to the Bible. At the end of the day, the bottom line is survival. We can talk about all the rules and the laws and commandments or whatever, but at the end of the day, survival is the ultimate theology. And we need to start with that idea that survival is most important in everything. I mean, what good is laws if you don't survive? So this was kind of the idea when it came to family, in the ancient world, even the biblical family. Patriarchy, we begin with, is actually something to do with protection. And that has to do with the insecurity of the state. And that is how patriarchy needs to be defined, in reference to the fact that the state is not secure. So the bottom line with patriarchy is the fact that when you're not safe, you got to have protection. Here is where the man comes in. The man comes in and says, I will protect you, women and children. Because of that, he makes the rules. So patriarchy has to do with the idea of an insecure state. Now, matriarchy is when the state is secure. When the state is secure, you have a very different function. Because Africa achieved a centralized government in 34 BC. They achieved this very early. Canaan never achieved a centralized government, neither did Sumer, Mesopotamia. It is Africa who gives structure to the understanding of both patriarchy and matriarchy. The African family is inherently matriarchal, not patriarchal. And we can trace this back to around 3900 BC is a good conservative estimate. Now, let's define patriarchy. Here it is. When a woman leaves her family or clan and go to live in the family or clan of her husband, this is a patriarchal family structure. Simple. If the woman comes and lives with the man, it's a patriarchy. Our example of this would be Isaac and Rebekah. If you'll remember the story, Isaac sends his servant to a distant land. He meets Rebekah. He asks Rebecca, she agrees, she comes back and lives with him. Because she's living with him and within his family and within his clan, this is a patriarchal structure. The next one is matriarchy. When a man leaves his family or clan and goes to live in the family or clan of his wife, this is a matriarchal structure. An example of this would be Jacob and Leah. Remember, Jacob flees from Esau and he runs to Laban and he marries Leah and Rachel. This is a matriarchal structure because now the man is living within the clan of his wife. All sorts of cultural ideas come into play when matriarchy is in play. One of the obvious example is that the man living in the wife's clan now becomes eligible for military service to defend the clan of his wife. Even if it's against his original clan, he is to defend the wife and her clan even to death. So there are a lot of cultural ideas that come into play with matriarchy. Now, it is important to understand here that in matriarchy, because it is a structure that Africa embraced, it is embraced from the standpoint of one God. This means that in the sight of God, in the understanding and conceptualization of the human in the sight of God, men and women are equal. This is a crucial point here. Women and men are equal in matriarchy because God is the creator of both. This means that in African societies, you actually have women who are equal and they rule. Now, matriarchy is not about ruling, it's about the bloodline. It's about making sure that the bloodline is pure. And it is a guardian of the heritage. But this also means that a woman is equal to the man, and this equality can be expressed. It means that women are just as smart as men, and they're just as capable of men. Therefore, in African societies, you have women who rule. They rule independent of their husbands sometimes, not because their husband dies or leaves them the throne, but because men will elect them as leaders because they're equal with men. And we have an abundance of evidence all through African history. Here is a list of 22 women who ruled in Africa throughout history. You don't find women ruling in Europe. You don't find women ruling in China or India. This is a specifically and unique aspect of African civilization. I would like for you to pay attention to number 18. Number 18 is Hatshepsut of Egypt. This is the same lady who rescued Moses from the river. When she rescues Moses, she is a princess, but she will eventually become the Pharaoh. All through African history, you find very powerful women who rule. But it's really not about rulership. It's about men and women being equal, and that women are the guardians of heritage. You also see that throughout Africa, not only can women rule, but women could be soldiers. They could fight. They could fight in battle against men. And because women were equal, it was believed that they were just as capable of fighting with men. And we see evidence of this throughout African history, as you can see here with the Dahomey. Now, when it comes to Israel, in Egypt, the Israelite nation developed among the African Egyptian matriarchal structure. This means that there is a tendency for Israel to have matriarchal elements. Probably the most obvious one is circumcision. Circumcision is not Hebrew, it's Egyptian. We can measure circumcision long before Abraham, about 600 years if memory serves. We can measure circumcision as an Egyptian, an African custom. Now, one last structure, and this is a patriarchy. Listen to this one. When a man and a woman both leave their family or clan to form an independent union, this is a patriarchal structure. In other words, if a man and woman, they leave their tribes and they go off and they form a new family somewhere else, well, this is a patriarchal structure. Why? Because when they leave, the woman is now completely dependent on the man for her survival. This means that she can't call 911. She can't call police officers. She can't call anybody. Her entire survival depends on her husband. This makes it a patriarchy. An example of this would be Abraham and Sarah. When Abraham leaves his home city of Ur, he travels to Canaan and settles down there. Sarah has no protection. She has no police officers to come to her rescue. If another tribe wants to come and take Sarah, then the only person she can depend on is Abraham. Now you will remember that Sarah and Abraham go to Egypt. In this case, Abraham fails to protect his wife by allowing the Pharaoh to take his wife. This was his whole duty to protect her, and this is an instance in which he failed. This is how the family is structured throughout the Old Testament. Now, when you read the Bible text again, some of these same stories, you will begin to understand why certain things were like they were. You will understand why certain decisions were made, because the structure of the family dictates a certain protocol. Now, we come to the area of David and Solomon. Under the United Monarchy, as it is called, under the United Monarchy, the state becomes stable. David is the king, he unites the land. He now has control over all of the promised land. He is now king, he has a centralized government, so now the family is relatively safe. All right, now, moment of choice. The family structure could change if it wanted to, but they're steeped in tradition, they've gotten used to it. Patriarchy is the way they understand life, it's the way they see themselves in society and their religion. Therefore, they decide to keep patriarchy and continue it. Now, this also makes some sort of sense because the state was not really as secure as you would like for them to be. And the reason why is because you have two empires that they're between. Israel is in the middle. To the north, you have the Hittite Empire. And if you remember, Uriah is probably the most famous Hittite within the Bible. And then that's the Hittites are to the north. And then you have Africa, North Africa, and more specifically Egypt to the south. So Israel is in the middle. So between these two empires, it actually makes sense for Israel to continue to be patriarchal. Patriarchy has a very bad name as oppressing women and things like this, but survival is the ultimate theology. And because of that, people wanted to feel safe. And in ancient times, the ability to be safe relied on the man's physical prowess to keep people safe. The last thing we need to understand about the ancient family is that throughout Africa and other countries and on each continent, you have many societies with many different customs and rituals and beliefs. But ultimately, it boils down to these basic three structures. And these three structures dictated how a family was to proceed.